I was thinking about this time when I was sitting in the car, gripping the wheel, a little bit shaky, and there'd been this incident with my son who, as you all probably know from watching my Instagram or other videos, has been struggling with aggression, and he had tried to bite and he didn't really want to get into the car. I finally got him in, and I was still waiting outside the therapist's office, and she comes out and he is crying and struggling, and she's smiling and saying we have to push him. I didn't feel like I did the right thing. It didn't feel good in any way. And all I could think was, when was the last time that we were in the car like that, headed to something that we were both excited about, that we were both happy about and wanted to be doing? Because that certainly wasn't the experience lately. And I remember that story because it was an important time for me. It was a time where I started to make some important choices in our lives. And if you ever found yourself in a moment like that, really wondering if all that stress you were under, if your son crying like that or your child crying like that was maybe a cue for you to stop and think about what was going on, then this video is for you. And if you're new here, my name is Wendy, and I am a developmental psychologist and mother to a 14-year-old severely autistic boy. And this channel is Parenting Through ASD. And if you've landed here, it is a channel about thinking a little deeply about what it means to parent an autistic or neurodivergent child. When I say child, I really mean a person with some sort of neurodivergence of all ages, really, because when you parent somebody who has a severe form of autism or other form of neurodivergence, you might be parenting them for the rest of their lives, whether they're a child or an adult. So this channel is really about you in that role as a caregiver and as a parent, and the kinds of things that we have to think about and ways to find strength and a point of view that can help us through that role. So welcome. So today I want you to think about, how constantly do you find yourself racing between appointments? Maybe you're at a stage in your child's development where you're racing them back and forth between therapies and doctor's appointments, and maybe they're still in school. And you are doing this telling yourself that you're giving them the best possible chance at making some kind of breakthrough or developing some skill that they're working really hard on. You've got occupational therapy on Monday, speech therapy on Tuesday and Thursday, maybe ABA therapy 2 or 3 times a week. Maybe you have social skills groups on the weekends, and school Monday through Friday. You're afraid of missing any window for development, and you're terrified of defying that sacred calendar. You hustle, you do everything you're supposed to do because everyone tells you that you don't want to miss an opportunity to help your child grow, and you listen. But what if that really pretty color-coded schedule is doing more harm than good for your child? And I'm not just talking about the constant overwhelm on their nervous system, which is very real, but about what could actually be a strain on your connection. This video is not about quitting therapy. I'm definitely not advocating that you suddenly stop everything that you're working on, and I'm not saying that you should not be working on goals. That's not what we're talking about here. This video is about reframing the way that you're operating right now as a project manager, maybe for your family, maybe a chauffeur and a scheduler, and instead thinking of yourself as the leader, the person who gets to make decisions and choices about how fast to go, how slow to go, when to do certain things, when not to, what goals to focus on, what goals to push off, and to do those things from a place of strength and confidence with your child's team, to take in the information and make decisions, but not to feel like you have to defer all of those decisions to somebody else and put yourself in the role of just doing everything that everybody else thinks is best, and then overburdening yourself and your kids. So let's take a deeper look at this. Okay, so there's something sort of germane to American society. I don't know what it's like in other parts of the world because I haven't lived there, but we have a saying here that more is more. And that is something that we take to heart in the autism community too. More therapy is better, is basically what that means. And I think it's a little bit because in the world of autism, it's a complex diagnosis. It can mean so many different things depending on who the child is and the environment they're growing up in and how the diagnosis is showing up. So you can have a child that is profoundly autistic and has very few social skills, no capacity for speech, and kind of locked in their own heads. You can have a child with autism that speaks very well, that goes to school and is in a normal classroom and maybe has some friends and does okay, and is hard to tell that they have a diagnosis at all. The versions of autism can look very different, and they can be very complex because there's also comorbidities with ADHD and sensory processing disorder and other kinds of things. What ends up happening is you kind of throw spaghetti at the wall to see which therapies we should use when we first get a diagnosis until the profile of symptoms starts to look more clear. So in the beginning, you just start every therapy there is to make sure that the child has the best chance possible. And that tends to stay the norm through development, even as certain things become clear. For instance, a child learns to speak, we may forget to stop speech therapy, or a child's occupational skills become better, and we may forget to stop occupational therapy when it's no longer needed. So more is more tends to be a trap that we fall into and can't quite climb out of once we've started it. And so I'm reminded of a friend that was such a clear case of this, and I'll call her Sarah. Sarah had this little boy, Liam, and well, that's not his real name, by the way, but we'll call him Liam. And he was maybe, I think he was 6 maybe. And they would go to all the therapies. He had OT, occupational therapy. He had speech twice a week. He had ABA therapy every single day. He had school every day. And he had a social skills group on the weekends. And then he had like OT and speech in school as part of the school services they were providing. So this kid had everything, and twice in some instances. And he was constantly melting down. I mean, he was always crying, always throwing things, always upset. And Sarah could not figure out what was going on. She was so at a loss, and her heart was broken. Yet she thought, how could I possibly get him any more help? I'm doing everything I possibly can. She didn't want to get him on medication because he was still so young, and it was hard to know what kind of autism he was going to have. So she didn't want to start medication too early, and she was struggling. And it finally occurred to one of the therapists that maybe it was too much therapy. Maybe he was being overwhelmed and overstimulated. And Sarah thought, well, is that possible? So she was doubtful that that could possibly be true, but she started to scale some things back. And sure enough, Liam started to feel better. He started to cry a whole lot less, and there were fewer meltdowns. And before you knew it, Sarah was much happier and couldn't believe that the problem was actually too much therapy. And if you think about it, I mean, his poor little nervous system, he was constantly being shuffled from one environment to a new environment. The constant different sounds, different lights, different people, different smells, different temperatures. And his body was having to adjust over and over and over and over all day long, every single day, because there was not a single day that he got to just stay home and play. And it became so clear that we can overburden our kids with therapies, and we can overburden ourselves. And it's okay to think about ways that we can scale that back, or we can more strategically put those things in place. So when I say that it's not about canceling therapies or stopping therapies, it really isn't. It's about you becoming the leader of your child's world, taking in the information from your therapist, listening to the goals that they suggest, listening to your pediatrician and maybe neurologist, whoever you're working with, taking in all of their opinions and their feedback and input, and figuring out what's most important for the family and your child, what you have capacity to work with in the moment, and staging them, phasing them. What do we work on now, and scatter what needs to happen one at a time. And we call this scaffolding. What needs to happen first so that your child can move on to the next goal, because not all goals can be worked on until something happens first, right? Like, if you think of the saying, you can't run until you've learned to walk, right? And that's true. There are some things that we can't do. Like, your child can't really learn to feed themselves until they've learned to use a fork, to hold a fork, right? So you might think of things like that when you're determining what kinds of goals to work on first and next and that kind of thing. But you might also just think of what is a safety issue or a risk issue that you need to address. What are things that are important to your family culturally that you want your child to engage in? Those kinds of things. And you make the decisions for your family, and then decide how to go about setting your goals and therapies so that you're not doing everything all at once, all the time. And not only will that make for more successful progression through goals because your child can actually focus and be able to do one thing at a time. You can also manage the stress for yourself and your family. But it's also important that you build those skills as a parent to be able to say, I'm okay leading the charge on how my child develops. It's okay to be that person. It can be scary, right? I have a doctorate and I have to make those decisions for my son from a place of a lot of education, but I was educated in typical child development, neurotypical children. I was not educated in anything that had to do with neurodivergence, autism, anything like that. And I actually had to unlearn everything I thought I knew about how a person is supposed to grow and develop over the lifespan and relearn what happens with my son. Not just autism, but my son specifically, because he has his own autism profile that I have to learn. And I have to learn about him every time he grows and goes through another stage of development. So I also have to go through that. It doesn't matter what education you have, what experience you have to constantly be adjusting to what your child is teaching you. And it's okay to feel a little bit of insecurity around that. It's okay to constantly be learning. And it's okay to say, I don't always know the answers, but I know how to get them by listening to all the people in my son's team, in my son's ecosystem that can show me things. But I can still be the one that makes those decisions. So there's a couple of things that can be helpful, I think, in taking on this leadership role. So firstly, we talked about phasing goals and scheduling things in a way that's more strategic. Another thing to consider is actually not scheduling anything. It's okay to take breaks, vacations from things, and give your child time to recover. And if you think about how a person learns, one of the reasons sleep is so important is because when you sleep, it gives your body a chance to process information and make sense of things, not only cognitively, but everything that your body has taken in, everything that has come in through sensory input, your body processes and makes sense of. And in the morning, has a new point of view on everything that you've experienced, right? And that break is so important. That is true for children working on their goals. If you think about a child with autism going through their goals, they are learning the way that a child at school is learning an academic program. They need time to process and learn that information. Your child on a plan going through goals needs time to process and learn that information and make sense of it, right? So it's okay to have vacations. This summer, I, for the first time since he has been in public school, did not enroll him in the extended school year. He's not doing it. I let him have his summer and I want him to be able to just rest. And he's also not doing ABA therapy. He's not doing any therapies. He has 60 days of nothing to do. And sometimes you need that as a family. They need that as kids who just don't have to work every single day of their lives. Okay, enough of that. So a couple of things that you also, I think, need to be prepared for in that role as leader of the family. One is co-regulation. So, we talk about that a lot in autism, in the autism community, being able to co-regulate with your child when they have meltdowns or even just when they're dysregulated. You can sort of tell, like my child is severely autistic. I can tell when he's not steady. He makes more noise. He's a lot more sensitive to touch. I can tell that on days like that, he may have a meltdown at any minute. He's like teetering. And you might be able to tell things like that about your child. So on those days, I'm kind of co-regulating with him all day long. I am doing things like compression. Anytime I come near him, I squeeze his shoulders a little bit. I rub his hair. That's a kind of sensory diet. There's sensations that he is used to that are organized, and it helps him regulate when I do these kinds of things. I also massage his feet. So on those days, I am co-regulating with him all day long. And when he has a meltdown on a day like that, I'm prepared to co-regulate. So the thing that I think a lot of people don't realize when you have a more severe autistic child, you don't just co-regulate through the toddler years. We're all real good at that. We can command a room when a toddler goes to do something. But you have to co-regulate past those years when your child has a more severe form of autism. And you have to adjust to what they need at different developmental stages. So if, as the leader of the family, that's something you have to be prepared to do. Another thing to consider in a role as leader of the family is this idea of bringing the goals home. So if you're not going to be doing therapy all the time, which is a good thing in my opinion, again, I am not advocating for stopping therapies by any means. And if for your family, there are no concerns with going to regular therapy all the time, that's fine. Some families have children who can tolerate therapy and a busy schedule very well. But for families who have children with more sensory processing issues, the therapies can be a bigger concern. Or for other reasons that aren't sensory processing issues, therapies can be a concern. So it's really about determining for your family whether it's a concern or not. So I'm talking to the families that need to take a step back and see if overburdening their children with therapy is a problem. So the second one that I was talking about is the idea of bringing goals home. So if you have staggered therapies, regardless of whether you've done that or you have all your things going at once, you still want to be the person who knows what all the goals are and understands how they can work in the home environment or in the life environment, in life context. Because most of our kids, even if you have in-home ABA therapy, they're not constantly using their goals in all their different everyday life skills. And you can be a person that helps your child understand how the things that they work on in these very structured environments can make sense out in the real world. And, you can, for instance, working in the kitchen, making cookies and having them put little sprinkles on and kind of connecting the dots for them about how they use their pincers and need to do that in everyday life, right? You might have your child actually working in ABA on something like brushing their teeth. And in ABA, they might have a simulated environment where they have a toothbrush and a model of a mouse that they work on. But you actually have a toothbrush and your kid's mouth at home. So you can't forget to bring that into an actual real life environment, because it can actually be really difficult for a child to learn things in a simulated context that's very abstract and have that make sense for the real life world. Because an autistic child in particular, can learn things in a very literal sense. And if you're simulating something and they learn that very literally, they don't really see how brushing the teeth of this plastic model thing is the same as brushing the teeth of a human person. So it can be very difficult to generalize. Anyway, you can be the person that helps make those connections by bringing the goals home. Let me leave it at that. Here's what we discussed. You can be the leader, not the chauffeur, not the project manager, not the scheduler, not the person who is sort of jerked around by the other therapists and professionals in your child's life. It's okay for you to take the information that's provided to you and use it to make informed decisions. Not be the tyrant, not be the dictator, but be well informed and make decisions. And it's okay to make mistakes once you take on that role, but keep learning and have the confidence to do that. And a couple of ways that you can execute being the leader in that role is to, one, phase strategically how goals and therapies are implemented over time. Sometimes do no therapy at all, just to give your child a chance to recover and recuperate from being bombarded and assaulted by constant sensory stimulation. You can also make sure that you bring the goals home so that you are able to be the person who oversees and understands all the different things that your child is working on in their life and help them make sense of them in everyday contexts. And as the leader of the family, you can take on that role of helping with co-regulation for your child as they work through different goals. So we'll keep having conversations like this on this channel. I do have a video coming out every Thursday night on topics like this. And if you like this kind of thing, you can like this video and maybe subscribe so you don't miss any of the forthcoming videos. Thanks for sticking around. I hope this is helpful, and we'll see you again real soon.